And I want to welcome everybody for our Global Security Forum 2025 session on the threat of nuclear anarchy with Ambassador Bonnie Jenkins. I want to thank our presenting partners. I also want to thank our sponsors, Pratt Whitney, Ensign-Bickford Aerospace and Defense, KPMG, Trinity College Center for Urban and Global Studies, and Patricia and Robert McLaughlin, as well as our advisors, all of our advisors, and all of our patron members. We are really in for a treat today with our talk with Bonnie Jenkins. I want to encourage everybody to use the chat. We have people joining us from all around the United States and all around the world. So please say hello in the chat. And I want you to, at any time, ask any questions. We're so lucky to have Ambassador Jenkins with us today. So please feel free to ask questions at any time using that Q&A function. I want to start with a formal introduction of Ambassador Jenkins because she is truly amazing and impressive, and we're so happy to have her with us again today. Ambassador Jenkins is currently the Shapiro Visiting Professor of International Affairs at the Elliott School of International Affairs at George Washington University. Ambassador Jenkins served as the Undersecretary of State for Arms Control and International Security Affairs from 2021 to 2024. In May 2023, Secretary Blinken named Ambassador Jenkins the lead on implementation of AUKUS, something that's very important to us as I sit here in Connecticut, and the Prime Minister is meeting in Washington as we speak. The trilateral security partnership between Australia, the United Kingdom, and the United States. Prior, Ambassador Jenkins served as the Special Envoy for Cooperative Threat Reduction Programs. She coordinated the U.S. government's efforts alongside international programs that prevent non-state actors from developing chemical, biological, or nuclear weapons. She was the State Department's lead for the President's Nuclear Security Summits and the U.S. representative to the G7 Global Partnership Against the Spread of Weapons and Materials of Mass Destruction. She led the diplomatic efforts to promote the global health security agenda. Ambassador Jenkins is the founder of Women of Color Advancing Peace and Security, and she's also a retired United States Navy Reserve officer. She has an incredible breadth of experience and leadership across national security issues. I encourage you to read her full bio, which has just been posted in the chat. And Ambassador Jenkins is also a returning speaker to the Global Security Forum. I think this is her third time. She is a fan favorite speaker, and we are thrilled that she's returning to speak with us today. Ambassador Jenkins, welcome.
Thank you. It is great to be back again to speak to all of you. Thank you for inviting me.
Of course, it's always a pleasure. I want to jump right into the conversation because this is really an important one. And we want to talk about the age, what's happening right now in nuclear proliferation. So in recent years, it seems that global willpower to pursue nonproliferation has waned. Nuclear nations are modernizing and expanding their arsenals. Nonproliferation agreements are at risk. Can you tell us what your assessment of these trends are? Is the world at risk, a higher increased risk of a nuclear conflict? What's at stake right now?
Yeah, thanks for that question. I think it's very clear that there's more concern because, as you referenced, you have China, which is traditionally had obviously a much lower number of nuclear weapons than, let's say, the U.S. and Russia. But in the past few years, they've been increasing their nuclear weapons development, their nuclear weapons and military establishment. And so that has raised a lot of questions about what is China doing and why are they doing what they're doing. Unfortunately, during the Biden administration, we were not really able to have the type of negotiations and diplomacy we wanted to have with them on this issue. So that is certainly concerning. And then, of course, we know that Russia had used a nuclear saber rattling a couple of times, at least in the war with Ukraine. So that has certainly increased our concern about the potential, the proliferation and potential actual use of nuclear weapons. And of course, we still have our issues with Iran. So I will say in that respect, it has been more concerning recently because of those issues. And, now in the US, there's concern, in terms of, whether, what is the US going to be doing in the future? We still have yet to get our nuclear posture review from this administration to see what they're thinking. So those are concerning. I will say, however, that we don't necessarily, besides those issues, non-proliferation, I think for the world hasn't changed a great deal. We still have countries who want the nuclear weapon states or to reduce and disarm. That hasn't changed. We still have a nuclear non-proliferation treaty review conference coming up next year, which we hope will be successful, and we'll have a consensus document, which we haven't had the last two times. So in that respect, that hasn't changed, but I think because of a few countries, there's been more of a concern. And I think what we need to do now is try to grapple with what's happening with these countries.
Absolutely. So you mentioned that we have a proliferation treaty expiring next year, right? So we know the New START is set to expire in February of 2026. Can you talk a little bit about what's at stake? What's at stake if that lapses?
Yeah, the New START treaty, of course, cannot be extended anymore. It extended once during when President Biden first came in, and now it has to expire if it's not extended. So clearly, it's almost November. It's unlikely we will get a new treaty by then, particularly since there's quite a bit that we'd like to go into a new treaty. What has happened is that Putin has reached out to the U.S. in the last few weeks, and has said that Russia is willing to stick by the existing limits in the treaty, which has happened. The U.S. has also maintained its limits in the treaty, and the U.S. has responded in an affirmative. So at this point, what looks like will happen is, even though the treaty will expire next year in February, both the U.S. and Russia have agreed to at least maintain the existing limits as they are now, which we're doing. Unfortunately, we're still not doing the inspections that are outlined in the treaty. We're still not meeting with them bilaterally like we're supposed to in the treaty. So those things are still not happening, but the two countries are within the limits. And if this can continue in terms of what the U.S. and Russia have agreed to, then we will continue to stay within the limits, at least until we can get back to the table and start negotiating.
Ambassador Jenkins, do you know, can you shed some light on what those limits are? What numbers are we looking at in terms of warheads?
You're looking at numbers in terms of 1550 and 800 in terms of what can be deployed in ICBMs and the SLBMs and in heavy bombers, what numbers can be maintained for launchers. And so those limits have been maintained, and so we hope that they will continue to maintain. Yeah.
So in 2021, you were negotiating the New START treaty before negotiations were stopped when Russia invaded Ukraine. Can you take us inside that room? What were some of the opportunities for negotiations? What were some of the sticking points?
Well, I think there were two, we had actually said, which was, I think we had two meetings before the end of the year, and then before they invaded Ukraine in 2022. And they were very open in the sense that we had said we can put anything on the table. And we understood that a new treaty was obviously one of the things that we wanted to get out of it. But we said, let's put other things on the table, because we may want to put other things in the treaty. And there may be other things we want to talk about that may not be in the treaty, that may not even end up in some kind of an agreement, but maybe it would be something we can have conversations about. So in addition to continue to extend the treaty and go further in terms of numbers, we also were thinking we want to limit all nuclear weapons. We wanted to do things like hypersonics. And we talked about, issues of space, maybe emerging technology. So we were really putting everything on the table. If it comes to sticking points, there were one thing on each side that we were very interested in. For us, it was tactical nuclear weapons. And this is something we were very interested in. Our NATO partners were very interested in making sure that those were also on the table. And for the Russians, it was missile defense. They wanted to include missile defense. So each one was a topic that let's say we didn't necessarily want to talk missile defense, but that's what they wanted. They didn't want to talk about tactical weapons, but that's what we wanted. So, but everything was on the table. And by the time the two meetings had ended, we had pretty much outlined what was going to be discussed. We had set up a couple of working groups and set up what was going to be discussed in each working group. And so we were ready for a third meeting to take place. So we were actually start getting into the details. Unfortunately, they invaded Ukraine, and that pretty much kept us from discussing a future treaty. But we understood that the existing New START must continue to be implemented.
So you just mentioned missile defense, and we're looking at the New START expiring in February 2026. To what degree is the Golden Dome an issue with negotiations with Russia, right? We know that Russia and China have stated back in May that they have concerns about the Golden Dome being a destabilizing factor.
Mhm.
So from your perspective, how much of this is an issue if we're trying to work with Russia going forward?
Yeah, and yes, and let's like kind of let's break it down a bit. So on New START, as you may recall, in the last Trump administration, they had wanted to bring China into those discussions because they wanted to make it a trilateral. Because the elephant in the room was always going to be China developing more weapons, as we discussed going down. Now, keep in mind, we still have much more than China at this point. So, which China recognizes. So that was not successful. So during the Biden administration, we said, let's just keep it bilateral, just us and Russia going forward. So you have that aspect of whether this administration would still want to bring China in to that. And then on the other side, you have Russia, who, as I mentioned, had approached the US about what to do with New START in the future if there's no treaty to replace the existing one, which is to stick by the limits that we have. But in that statement that Putin had provided, he also made it a reference to let's see how things go. We'll stick with the limits, but being aware of other things may be happening. And I think the reference was about Golden Dome and the concern that if we do go forward with Golden Dome, as you said, there is a concern already by Russia and China. And so the question would be, how might that impact negotiations that we may have at New START? Would they want to bring that in some way or reference that in some way? And would that impede discussions with Russia going forward? So that's really the question. And it was referenced pretty much in the exchange that Putin made about sticking with existing limits with New START.
So I have a question, since we're talking about START, from Frankie Peralta here. With regards to the New START, asking, without inspection, how are we sure that Russia will continue to stay within its promised limits when, history has shown that maybe Putin isn't the most, a leader that can be the most trusted? Thank you.
Yes. Yes. Well, inspections obviously is what you prefer. You always want to be able to actually go and look at things and measure things and test what you're seeing versus what was provided as far as information. However, one thing we always have relied on is national technical means and satellites, for example, to make assessments. And so right now, the US and Russia are relying on national technical means really to keep an eye on each other and make sure we're both staying within the limits. Like I said, we do want to have inspections. That's much more preferred because it's good to use that with national technical means. But with natural technical means, we can still do an assessment of, how much is deployed, whether things are not deployed, and those kind of things. So it's adequate. It's doing the job, but of course, we would prefer to have inspections going forward.
Absolutely. And here's another follow-up question from David on Golden Dome. From your perspective as a global security professional, do you think that the Golden Dome is an effective form of defense for the United States, and how does this play into global security?
I think two things. First of all, there's a deterrent side in terms of if we do Golden Dome, let's say it is successful, how does that impact Russia and China in terms of how they react to it? And will they feel that they have to do something themselves to feel that they can have an adequate response, or be able to feel that they can do what they need to do to feel secure if we have that kind of a defense system. So there is that question in terms of how it may affect deterrence. But also there's concern about proliferation. I mean, that also can lead to proliferation if another country feels that they have to do more, that they have to develop more of their capabilities to address what they see as a new threat to them, or what they could achieve to defend themselves. That could lead to proliferation, which I think is the biggest concern. And third, is whether, what is the potential for success? In terms of, it's a very elaborate plan. And so what are the possibilities that we could be successful in actually doing everything we want to do? So it's just similar to the SDI program back in the Reagan days. I think there were parts of it that were successful, but I think a lot of people were concerned that a lot of it could not be done. And I think very similar, we have that situation. And it's also a lot of money to actually make this thing happen. So.
Thank you, Ambassador Jenkins. And a question returning to China. So sort of, we know you stated that China has the fastest growing nuclear arsenal among the 9 nuclear armed nations. Are we seeing this, can you tell us more about this aggressive nuclear posture on behalf of China? You just said that we still have more. How many do they have? What kind of weapons are they developing? Do you think that China's aggressive posture is going to lead to a renewed arms race?
Well, what I can say is we don't know as much about their decision to develop more nuclear weapons, and we can make an assessments. But what we really wanted and what would be really helpful is to have discussions with them on this issue. They don't want to have real diplomatic exchanges on this. I mean, for example, when I was in government, I would meet with my Chinese counterparts whenever we were at meetings together, whether at the UN or whether in Geneva or wherever. So we did have exchanges, but we wanted to have, what we sought were more regular exchanges where this was on the table. We did have one meeting with them to discuss these issues, but they were very reluctant to have regular exchanges with us. And they wanted to not be as transparent as we had hoped they would be. And not necessarily that we wanted to talk about arms control, because we knew they weren't going to talk arms control because they're building up their weapons. So they're not going to talk about how to get rid of them or how to limit them. But we wanted to have, can we just have like understanding on confidence building measures, ways that we can ensure that there are no accidents, or if something happened, we know that, we understand what's going on. So there's not a lot of transparency on what they were doing. So unfortunately, I can't say a lot about that. We just can make assessments of it. It is a concern. I mean, they have said things like they want to be on par with the US and Russia. I don't know what that means, because we have, Russia has like 5,000, we have 5,000 plus, Russia has 5,000 plus. That's a lot to grow when I think they're around 600 or so. That's the last assessment I saw. So is that really what they want to do? To build that much? And are they going to try to do it in other ways? Can you use technology to feel that you have the same kind of power that you need, that Russia and the US has? But it certainly will complicate things because if we get back to the table with Russia for a new start, there is a question about how that may impact, those negotiations. And do countries like the US feel comfortable continue to disarm when we have another country that's building theirs up? Like I said, we have a lot more, but it's still something that's out there that people are asking about.
So you mentioned in relation to China that it's sort of how advanced technology is impacting our nuclear arsenals around the world. So can you talk a little bit about how these advancements in technologies like artificial intelligence, cyber capabilities, hypersonics, how is that reshaping nuclear security and strategic stability?
Well, I think a lot depends on how militaries are using it. I think, you know, even in our everyday lives, we can see the differences between like 4 months ago and today, how we could do some of the same things. They've changed because it companies, schools, government has incorporated AI. So it's happening in the military just like it's happening everywhere else. It's in terms of being able to make decisions faster, providing information quicker. And so I think that's kind of a natural thing because it's happening everywhere. But of course, if you're talking about the military, you're going to be a lot more concerned. Um, what I can say is, our Department of Defense has been very focused on this. And one of the things that we were able to do at State Department with Department of Defense was work with them on AI in the military. Both the Netherlands and South Korea hosted a couple of meetings that was focused on AI in the military, and quite a few countries attended these events. And at both of those multilateral discussions, there were documents that were released, drafted by the countries to talk about AI in the military. And I would encourage anyone listening to just Google AI in the military, Netherlands or South Korea, and you'll see the documents that came from that. But the US also had its own declaration from that. And this declaration really focused on AI in the military, of course, and things that countries should take into account more as a best practices document, since we don't really know what different militaries are doing in AI or much less, some of these other technologies. AI, of course, being the most transient because people are actually seeing it happen. I would encourage folks to Google that as well for the declaration on AI in the military that's been drafted by the U.S. and Department of Defense. I think at this point, when I left government, there were about 50 countries who had joined on to that. And so the other thing I will mention is that the agreement that the P4 has had on this issue, the US, the UK, and France had already agreed that there would be a human in the loop in terms of any kind of nuclear employment before the end of President Biden's tenure. We were able to get agreement with China on that as well. And so there's an effort to try to get Russia to also agree, at least have the P5 agree on humans in the loop, and it wouldn't be used to any kind of AI or other kind of effort there in terms of nuclear employment. So I would encourage individuals, if they're interested in that kind of thing or those kind of issues, it's out there and just kind of Google it. Yeah.
I spent some time at the U.S. Army War College over the summer, and my team will tell you when I came back, the only thing I could talk about was AI in the military. So, and I'm still talking about it. So they're probably tired of me saying we have to look at AI in the military. But I do encourage everybody to take Ambassador Jenkins' advice and look that up. And we may have a team member posting some links in the chat that you can check out. I thought we could take a little bit of a tour of the world and see what's going on in terms of looking at issues around nuclear proliferation. So I'll ask you your analysis on some places in the world. So I wonder if we could get your take on what's happening currently in North Korea.
Well, not enough between the US and North Korea, I can say that. I mean, North Korea remains a concern. We still have to, as the U.S., figure out how to really deal with North Korea, and our continued desire for denuclearization of North Korea. So it's still an issue. We're still, not happy when they're doing tests of, ballistic missile tests. Fortunately, they have not done a nuclear test. I know that's one thing that we were very concerned about a couple of years ago. It still has not happened, which is good. We still don't want that to happen. But for me, I would love to find a way that we could just get to the table with them, but it's been very difficult. I know during the entire Biden administration, we were very clear that we were open to having a conversation with them. But they never responded positively to that. So we'll see what happens in this administration. I haven't heard much talk about this issue so far. But like I said, they're working on their nuclear posture review. In addition to other official documents that each administration does. And that hopefully will have some of the current administration's thinking on how we approach North Korea.
Excellent. So a follow-up audience question. The second I said we started talking about North Korea. So with regards to North Korea's nuclear arsenal and Kim Jong-un's recent actions and policies towards South Korea, would a nuclear-armed South Korea be an effective deterrent against North Korea in your perspective?
Well, so far, as you know, both South Korea and Japan are under our extended deterrence. So far, we feel that's been effective, not only as being a deterrent, but also helping to ensure we don't have more nuclear states. I think one of the obvious goals of the nuclear umbrella and extended deterrence that we have with South Korea and Japan is to help ensure that they know that our commitment to them is ironclad, which we have said many times to them, and that they do not have to feel they have to develop a nuclear weapon themselves. You have to also remember China's in the region as well. So more nuclear weapons developments could very much complicate that entire region. So we are hoping that South Korea and Japan will continue to feel that the extended deterrence is viable and workable for them. I know that during the Biden administration, we increased the number of bilateral meetings with them. We also, do what we could to have more of a military display with them, including having our B-52s and nuclear subs there. We're hoping that is successful. Having a military show with them, but we know that South Korea has a domestic population that is concerned about this issue and has always wanted a nuclear weapon. So that I don't know if that's necessarily gone down recently, but we know that, and that's one of the reasons why we put so much effort and energy into making them feel and understand our commitment to them and for our nuclear umbrella.
A question from David Maslin. Is Taiwan a potential flashpoint for use of nuclear weaponry? Is there a clear U.S. policy vis-a-vis China on this issue?
We have never made any kind of, that I'm aware of, statements regarding use of nuclear weapons over Taiwan. I think that we have always been obviously committed to helping Taiwan wherever we can, as we can, particularly with our security assistance. I can certainly say that whenever in many cases, when I was engaging my Chinese counterparts about engaging with us diplomatically on nuclear issues, very often the issue of Taiwan came up and their focus on Taiwan. So we know that is a major issue that they continue to be concerned about. I know there has not been a lot that I've heard in this administration on Taiwan. Hoping that we will hear more in the future. We continue to provide assistance to Taiwan as we could. So
let's turn to Iran now, right? In their nuclear situation, right? Which you'll get different assessments depending on who you ask. What's your assessment on where Iran may stand in the pursuit of nuclear weaponry?
Well, I still hope that we can find a diplomatic solution to this. We know that Iran really wants to get rid of the sanctions. We know that they know that we want very much for them to not develop a nuclear weapon. I still think there are possibilities for diplomacy, and hopefully we can get back to the table for that. I mean, obviously, the longer it takes to do it, the more likely we won't be successful. But it's been a long time since we pulled out the JCPOA. They still have not done it. So I think that that to me means that there continue to be opportunities. So of course, we don't want them to continue to enrich their uranium closer to the amount that they would need for a nuclear weapon. They're not there yet. And so as long as they're not there yet, we still have an opportunity. So I do hope that this administration will try to find a way to do that. There were opportunities and there were efforts, in the time that the Trump administration has taken over. So I'm hoping that they will do that.
So we just talked about the potential of Iran getting into the nuclear race. Last week, Vladimir Putin made some allusions in an interview that could be interpreted as that he sees other countries getting into the nuclear race. Do you see any other countries with the potential to gain nuclear weapons?
I mean, of course, they have to have the capability to do it. I mean, you just can't, make a decision tomorrow. So I think there's a lot of countries that actually have no desire to do it. We have quite a few countries that are part of the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. The vast majority of obviously do not want one. It's not as if everybody wants one because it takes a lot of commitment in terms of money, infrastructure, and it has a security dilemma in terms of developing one in the region and other countries feeling like they may also want one or feel threatened. So the vast majority of countries obviously don't. And so I think we should highlight that first. We've always been talking about the same 9 countries for a number of years. It's always been the same 9. And that have or were developing or are interested in nuclear weapon. That number has not increased. Of course, as I said, we're concerned now about South Korea, which has traditionally had an interest, or some other domestic entities that had an interest. There was always maybe Japan might. So I mean, there's always that potential that countries may want to. There's always a desire. More does not equal more safe necessarily. So I think we need to continue to tamp down on potential new countries. I think we need to continue to keep it as low as possible, and we need to continue to have the countries that have them to continue to get rid of them. And that's why we need another START treaty to continue to reduce and to show the rest of the world that the 2 largest possessors are interested in reducing, and we have to also find a way to get China to stop increasing their numbers, which may be the most challenging.
So let's talk a little bit about how conflicts in the war in Ukraine or tensions in the Indo-Pacific might be impacting the risk of nuclear conflict. But I want to bring in a question from Greg Osick, who said, are Putin's threats to use nuclear weapons as part of the war in Ukraine, are they just bluster, or are they, could we expect a reasonable scenario where that would happen?
I think that when a country that has nuclear weapons threatens to use them, I think you need to always take it seriously. So I think that's the first thing. But then use diplomacy to try to explain to them and help them understand why, threatening to use nuclear weapons is not necessarily a good thing to do. And one of the points that we always made is, if you have nuclear weapons, you have to be a responsible nuclear weapon state, and that includes not threatening to use them, and trying to find ways that you can get our global situation or a regional situation where you can not necessarily feel the need to develop more. And actually to go the other way and to actually try to reduce them. So whenever a country threatens to use them, you need to push back as hard as possible on that threat, which I think has happened when they've used that as a threat, and to convince them that that's not the way to address the situation. So you do have to take it seriously. But one of the things that you also saw when Russia threatened to use them was we didn't make a lot of fanfare about it. We made sure, at NATO with our partners that, we didn't respond in a exaggerated way, because we don't want to give it a lot of attention, but you just want to make sure that you impress upon them that that's not what you should be doing.
Excellent. So we have another question, 2 countries we haven't mentioned yet, Pakistan and India. The question is Pakistan still an active proliferator of nuclear technology? What is the current state of affairs between India and Pakistan? We know that there's been a lot of tensions recently. What's going on?
Mm-hmm. I don't have information really how much they're proliferating. Obviously, with Aku Khan, they did, there was a lot in the past. Yeah, India, Pakistan, obviously historical, issues with them. And, we all knew that when India went nuclear, we knew Pakistan would go immediately after. Recall back in those days when we tried to convince them not to, it was we all pretty much knew it was going to be not successful, because of the way in which the two countries, to relate in their history. They've had, a number of very important and skirmishes, in the past, since they both developed nuclear weapons. Fortunately, in those times, they have not used them. Um, my only hope is that they don't have skirmishes, and that when they do, um, it's a historical thing, so that when they do, that they don't consider the use of nuclear weapons against either, because it's not going to end well for either one if one uses them. So, it's a concern. It's obvious concern because we know of the historical issues that they have, and we know that there could always be a flare up between the two countries. Um, but we want to always impress upon them that using a nuclear weapon is not the best way, or even should even be considered as a way to resolve any of their issues, any of their problems.
So so this always happens. So many great questions coming in at the end. So I'm gonna ask three more. I'll ask this one from Pat Sheehan. Both Biden and Trump have said that Iran can never have a nuclear weapon. Trump's B-2 attack set back Iran's program and changed the balance of power in the region. Did that change Russia's willingness to discuss non-proliferation?
I'm not sure how much that the attack on Iran really changed Russia's. I think, as countries, we look at what's happening globally, and we assess what's happening globally, and we look at how how that should impact our decision making. So I would say that, like most countries, Russia looked at what happened and considered what does that mean in terms of what the US is willing to do, what Iran's willing to do, how that may factor into their own thoughts about proliferation, or rather their own thoughts about, non-proliferation overall, and what they may want to do in terms of negotiating with the US in the future. So I wouldn't say necessarily that it changed their view. I think it's just it's more information that they will take in terms of what they would want to do on these issues.
So let's talk worst case scenario. So in the worst case scenario of a nuclear crisis, how prepared are we as a nation to respond to the threat and prevent escalation? Can you take us inside how the US is prepared to respond to a nuclear threat?
Um, I don't know if that's anything that's really necessarily changed. I think, you take in new information. If you have more countries with nuclear weapons, that will adjust your thoughts. For example, with China increasing its nuclear weapons, that will obviously be taken into account in terms of how we look at the region, how we may want to uh, shape our own nuclear uh, decisions in terms of that, and whether we need to make any changes. Same with Russia. When Russia threatens to use nuclear weapons, we take all that into account. We don't necessarily make changes just because of that, but we take it into consideration. For example, how will that change? Let's say we get back to the table. If it takes a while longer and China has more nuclear weapons, it shows that it definitely wants to have more nuclear weapons. That may change how we approach Russia when we get back to New Start. So, we're always, prepared to respond to nuclear weapons use. We want to deter any use of nuclear weapons. We hope that there's diplomacy that can also help prevent that there's things like the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty and the commitments in the treaty that will prevent countries or itself prevent countries from developing them. That diplomacy can help countries not use them or threaten to use them, and use all of these tools that we have to be ready to respond if we need to, but to hopefully deter and prevent countries from wanting to use them.
So I'm going to ask you this final question. Throughout your career, you've worked to address a wide variety of global threats. Can you give us an update today with all of the uncertainty that we're living with in the world? What concerns you the most? So our World Affairs Council audience wants to know, so what are the top three things that we should be watching?
I think one is diplomacy. There was a time when we used to talk about the 3Ds, and the 3Ds were diplomacy, development, and defense. And the 3Ds were really about how do we use a whole of government approach to address national security, to strengthen our national security, to strengthen global security. We've lost one of the Ds, and that's important because no matter what we try to do in other countries, if these countries are fragile, they don't have strong governance structures, a lot of what we try to do won't work in the long run. In diplomacy, we've had a hit because we've lost a lot of people at the State Department. So what that means is we have to rely more on the third D, which is defense. That could be a problem if we don't have a strong diplomatic corps to engage with countries on a regular basis and continue relationship building, even with countries that we don't necessarily get along with on a regular basis. We have to be able to talk to them. So that's the first thing is that we have hurt ourselves in terms of we had 3Ds. I guess now we have to have a D&1/2. A D3/4. I don't know. But I think that the ability of us to really be out there as a leader has gone down, I think, because we're not, and because of all the things USAID did, not only for strengthening countries, but a presence that we had in these countries, which we don't have. I guess the second thing would be, you mentioned new technologies. I mean, we don't know where they're going to go. We're still developing. We just talked about AI. There's a lot more new technologies. There's, quantum, there's biotechnology, and what is that going to mean in terms of biological weapons? And is it going to be easier for countries and individuals to develop biological weapons in their basements, in their backyards and things? So the whole biotech field is, I think, really not getting a lot of attention because I think AI is. But that's something to be worried about, particularly since you have things like the Biological Weapons Convention that doesn't have an inspection regime. And so I think that's a very unexplored area right now because we're focusing a lot on AI. But then, of course, the third is not just the new technologies, we have new domains. We have space and how that could be militarized. We have issues in the Arctic. We have undersea cables. These are three areas that I'm looking a lot more in right now. And if anybody's doing research on space, the Arctic undersea cables, please let me know because I'm looking at those new areas. So it's a much more, it's complicated. You have these new domains, we have these new technologies, and we have less people really focusing on strengthening governments and diplomacy. And so I think at a time that we need to be putting a lot more emphasis on two of the Ds, we have gotten rid of one and kind of hurt the other. So we have to figure that out because the technologies are not going to stop. We have more countries involved, more entities involved, more academic institutions involved, private sector involved in the emerging technologies. We don't even know who everybody is doing it. And that's just on AI. That's not talking about the other ones. And, I'm looking at some of the legal issues related to space and undersea and things like that. And so that's kind of what we're dealing with right now. We need to have a lot more people focused on that. And I would say even if we don't have a government that's necessarily focusing on a lot of these issues, I didn't even mention climate change, which obviously is important. We still have to have organization, institutions, academic institutions, scholars still doing a lot of this work because we can't always rely on the government to do it all. And if they're not willing to do some of these things, we can't give up. We have to, as individuals and institutions, continue to focus on these issues and work with countries and individuals from other countries to do that as well.
Ambassador Jenkins, it's always a pleasure to have you at our Global Security Forum and at the World Affairs Council. Thank you so much for sharing your insight and your wisdom with us today.
Of course, my pleasure. Thank you for focusing on these issues.
They're so critical, to creating a better world. So we're so grateful for you, and thank you to everyone who joined us today.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you.